So we'll have this available. Okay, so welcome everybody. In case we haven't met before, my name is Doug Hennig. I'm one of the partners with Stonefield Software. I'm also the lead developer for the Stonefield Query family of products. And what we're going to do today is go through the new Stonefield Query Enterprise product. It's in beta right now. We're expecting to release it about the end of the first quarter of 2014, just in case everybody wonders what the year is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through sort of a two-part webinar here. We'll go through Stonefield Query Studio first, and then we'll go through Stonefield Query Web, which is the report designer. I'm going to assume that you have familiarity with the current product. So I'm not going to go through every single feature. I'm just going to go through mainly differences, especially in Studio, on the Studio side. I'm just going to talk about what the differences are between the old version and the new version, and point out things that are new, things that are changed, and so on, so to get you started on that.
And this is what we've got available to us at the moment, isn't it, to use in the beta version? Yes,
actually my version is a little bit newer. We've got a new release coming out later this week. That will be what I'm showing you here. I mean, it's not a lot of changes. It's mostly bug fixes. A couple of new things, but mostly bug fixes. All right, so this is Stonefield Query Enterprise Studio. It looks almost exactly the same as the older version, but there are some changes. One thing, for example, that you don't see is there's no scripts node here, no scripts panel, because scripting is no longer done in Stonefield Query Studio. Scripts are actually written now in some .NET language like C# or Visual Basic, and you'll do that in Visual Studio and create a DLL. And there'll be lots of examples of that, how to do that in the help file. There's actually some examples now, but there'll be lots more examples. So a couple of other new things, though, are join trees. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about a join tree, other than just to point out that a join tree allows you to define exactly how two non-directly related tables should be joined. For example, in an accounting system, you might have table A joins to B, joins to C, joins to D, but you might also get from A to D by going through A to E to F to D. One of those paths is probably going to be correct, and the other one probably won't be. But Stonefield Query doesn't know that. It only knows that there are, each individual pair of joins, so it doesn't know that it should be going one path over the other to get between A and D. So with a join tree, you can say that when a report includes tables A and D, here's how to get there. And so it's sort of, it's a better mechanism than join weights, which we still support, but this works better than join weights too. Another thing that's new in here are custom settings. Stonefield Query itself doesn't use anything that you define in here, but this might be used by plugins, similar to a feature that we had in our older version where you could create an options setting script or a setup setting script where you could put in settings that you wanted the users to be able to have to enter because your own code supported it. Same kind of idea here. One other thing I should show you. On the start page, there's an options dialog like there was before. There's just a couple of new things here. When you launch Stonefield Query Enterprise Web, do you want to use whatever your default browser is, or do you want to force it to use a specific browser, and it shows a drop-down list of whatever browsers you've got installed on your machine? Anyway, let's talk about some of the differences in the different objects now. For database objects, I'm going to actually, somebody's got some noise going on in their office, so I'm just going to mute everybody. There we go. And when it's time for questions, I'll unmute everybody just to keep the noise level down. Or if you want to ask a question right away, you can always type it, and I'll see it there. Anyway, so at the database level, we have a few new things here. One is the connection type. Use default connection means that whatever connection string is specified here, which is used by Studio itself, will also be used in the report designer. Another option is shared connection. This is actually disabled right now because I only have one database in my data dictionary. If I had more than one, then I could have a connection string for one of them. I could choose share connection for the other one, and then I'd choose from this drop-down list which one I want to share with. That's commonly used if you have, say, two databases on the same server, so you want to use the same connection information and just differentiate by the database name. Another option here is user can choose DSN. This is similar to the user can manage DSN's configuration setting in our older version, where you didn't know in advance, say, what connection information to use, and so you allowed your users to pick from a list of DSNs which ones they wanted to connect to. The last one is scripted, which is like having, in our older version, a get data sources script. In fact, we even use the same method name. It's just going to be in a data engine plugin instead, though. And so that's where you'll give it some code that will specify the connection information. This is commonly used when, for example, you've got a say connection information stored in some kind of configuration file or a table or something like that on the user's machine, and therefore you don't know at design time what connection information to use. It has to be resolved at runtime. And so with a script, you can specify what that information should be. The connection string that goes in here is a typical ODBC connection string, and you can click on test. So again, the same kind of things we had before. At the table level, there's not really a whole lot of changes other than this button or this checkbox here, do not refresh. We did support that in an older version, in the older version, using a configuration setting, but now it's right here. So the idea is that if for some reason when you refresh the data dictionary, you don't want this one table refreshed, this allows you to specify that. Again, not very often commonly used, but it is there in case you do need it. Quite a few changes at the field level. First of all, you'll notice that one of the changes that we made is that for real tables, and actually in fields as well, I didn't mention that, but for tables as well, is that you can no longer change the name of the object. You can for a calculated field. So here, for example, I've got a calculated field, and I can specify whatever name I want to. But for a real field, we've disabled that. That's mostly because we ran into some support issues where a developer would think they were changing the caption of a field, but they changed the name instead, and now none of their reports work because they specified a field name that doesn't in fact exist in the database. So another thing that we've disabled is the data type, again for real fields only, and again that's for pretty much the same reason. We had support issues where developers would specify the wrong data type for a field, and then their reports wouldn't work, and it would take us a while to figure out why, and so on. Again, for a calculated field, though, you can specify your data type. These are going to be .NET data types, so things like Boolean and datetime and string and things like that. We also don't care about the width of the number of decimals anymore like we did in our older version. That's actually because of auto formatting and the way things are dealt with. We just don't care about those kinds of things in the data dictionary anymore. Content type is a new item here. Normally this will be set to normal, and in fact it's disabled for anything except for string and byte fields. This is used when your field might contain something other than just regular text or numbers or things like that. For example, I have a comments field here that contains HTML text. In our older version, we had a way to strip out HTML codes, and so you could display the plain text. We just didn't have a way to actually render the HTML or RTF text on our report, so you couldn't see bold and italics and things like that. You could just see the regular text or just the codes. So because this field contains HTML code, if I had chosen normal for this, then when I output it on the report, well, I'll see things like bracket, font, and bracket, bold, and the HTML codes. So by choosing HTML, I'm telling Stonefield Courier that this field contains HTML content, and so when we render on a report, we'll actually see HTML and not those codes. Same thing with RTF. Right? I don't want to see RTF codes, rich text format. I want to see actual rich text on the report, and so you can tell us that. Another option is image. So that means that this field contains an image, and again, we don't want to see the individual bytes of the image. We want to see a rendered image. Image path is similar, except rather than containing the image, this field contains the path to an image on disk, and so again, we'll render that as an actual image. Heading and comments, same as before. Format is different. We used to have a single or two controls to specify format. Now we just have one. And the format items are, you can specify whatever you want to in here as long as they follow certain rules. But we have a sort of a predefined list of certain values for numeric fields, for example, and for date fields. So for numeric fields, C2 means it's a currency field with 2 decimal places. Meaning it'll show a currency symbol, commas every 3 places, and 2 places after the decimal. There's also other choices here, and again, these are sort of like Excel format. If we take a look at a date field, like order date, Then the choices are things like date only, date and time, a date a little bit longer date and time with seconds, time only, and so on. So there's various codes here, and the drop-down list shows you what those will look like. Default summary type, let's go back to this other table here. Default summary type is a new option. This is set to none. However, you can set it to a different value, like sum, for example, and that means that whenever you add this field to a report, Stonefield Query will automatically turn on whatever choice you've made. So in this case, sum for this field. We did have an option similar to this in our older, or do have an option similar to this in our older version. In the options dialog, you can have it auto sum all numeric fields. And that works great, except for some fields you probably don't want to sum, like things like unit price, for example. It really doesn't make sense to sum up the unit prices of fields. And so in the old version, if you had auto sum turned on, you had to then go and turn it off for things like unit price. Whereas now we've got it more granularly controlled right at the field level. Roles, the same as we had before. We just changed the name of it. Instead of calling it user groups, we've now given it the name roles, just because that's essentially what it is. The calc page is a little bit different now, though. If we take a look at a regular field, you notice we've got a couple of controls here: value converter and plug-in data, and I'll talk about those in a second. For a calculated field, it looks similar to the way it was before. We've got a place where you can put in an expression, and you can use the expression builder. We changed the wording of this. Instead of showing it as a Stonefield query expression, which some people question what exactly does that mean, we've actually made it a little bit more obvious what it is. Send expression to database. So in other words, should this expression be sent to the database as is, or if this is turned off, should Stonefield Query evaluate the expression instead? In the expression builder, it's pretty much the same as it was before, except there's a couple of new things. One is that under built-in functions, we have a list of built-in functions like we had before. In our old version, those were all FoxPro functions, and there was like 500 of them. We've trimmed that list down considerably, for one thing, because a lot of the functions just weren't being used and didn't make sense in a reporting solution. But because this is .NET, of course, some of those functions don't exist. So we've actually recreated a lot of the commonly used FoxPro functions as .NET functions. Plus, we've also created some other functions that have the same names as Excel functions. So, for example, eDate is an Excel function. It's basically similar to the GoMonth function, which we also have. So these two things basically do the same thing. It's just that this one uses the same name and syntax as Excel would use. Same thing with date diff. Date value is actually the same thing as date is the same thing as now. It's just that now is an Excel function name. So again, we've got a pretty good list of functions here. And these are all documented in the help file. Under plug-in functions, these are functions that you've created. So you'll write some code as a static class and static methods. Could be in VB, could be in C#, whatever .NET language you want to use. You'll create a DLL and simply drop it into a plugins folder. Actually, a functions folder in this case. Stonefield Query will recognize those and automatically pick them up and display them here. So I've obviously created 4 different functions in a little DLL. And when you pick one of them, it actually shows you the signature of that function. So this returns a decimal. It's called getTax, and it expects to be passed a decimal, for example. So other than that, the expression builder works the same. It's just that it has a sort of a different list of functions there. If you choose a regular field, then the values look a little bit different here. Value converter is used to convert values from the way they're stored in the database to the way you want the user to see them. For example, I actually do have one here. In orders, I have, we'll talk about that in a second. So the idea of a value converter is that, let's say, for example, you've got an accounting system like Sage 300 that stores dates as numeric values. So today's date would actually be stored as 2014-0114, that numeric value. So the problem, of course, is that the user doesn't want to see that numeric value. They want to see a date like 01/14 or 14/01, depending on how you've got it formatted, 2014. So in the older version, you could write an expression for that would do the conversion. But in the newer version, we're actually doing it a little bit better, and that's with a value converter. So a value converter is a very small amount of code that takes a value and converts it to a different value, and then does the opposite of that. So for example, we've got a built-in value converter called numeric to date value converter. So it takes a numeric value and converts it to a date, and takes a date value and converts it back to numeric. The reason for the two-way is because for filtering purposes, the user may choose the 14th of January 2014, but that's not an actual numeric value. So in that case, the value converter will convert the date to numeric value that's passed to the database engine for filtering. When the values are being displayed to the user, the value converter takes those numeric values, converts them to dates, and that's what gets displayed in the report. So that's why it's a two-way converter. We've got a bunch of other ones, string to numeric values. So, for example, in some databases we found that numeric values are actually stored as strings, and so this would convert them. TF and YN, so this would take a character field that contains a T or F standing for true or false, or a Y or N standing for yes or no, and convert it to a Boolean value. You can write your own value converters. They're really easy to write. There's really only a couple of methods you need to implement, convert and convert back. You take one data type and one value, and you convert it to the other data, the appropriate value. So they're, like I said, they're really easy to write, and if you drop them into a folder, they'll just automatically appear here in Studio. Plug-in data is used if the plug-in, the value converter that you specified, needs some additional information about this field other than just the name. So you could put whatever you want to in here. We don't use it. It would be used by your value converter if necessary. On the special page, it actually works exactly the same as it did before. We've got enumerated values and display field from related table. The difference internally is that these are actually implemented using value converters now, rather than some special code that we had to do. So these work exactly the same as this kind of value converter. It's just that because they were commonly used, we put special UI for them, just like we had before. At the relationship level, there's really not too much different here other than just a wording thing. Under join type, rather than showing the words left outer join and right outer join, we now show the terms favor child and favor parent. And the reason for that was just sort of a confusion thing. We had a number of developers who, didn't know whether they should use a right outer join or a left outer join, because that depends on how Stonefield Query internally built the join. Did we put the child on the left or on the right? We actually normally put it on the left, and so if you wanted to favor the child, you'd use a left outer join. But again, that means you have to be privy to our, the internals of our code. Now you just specify favor child or favor parent, and whichever way we create that join, you're telling us whether it needs to, be an inner or an outer based on what side the child or the parent is on. So that's pretty much the only difference there. Another thing that's new is that although we do internally support application views, we don't support them in the current version in the UI yet, and so that's why the application views panel has been removed. That'll be re-added in a future. It's just basically hidden. That'll be re-added in a future version when we do support application views in the user interface. Another nice new feature is although this was there before, you could view the contents of the table. One thing that's different, though, is that we didn't support that for virtual tables or subtables. We also didn't support it for calculated fields where it was a Stonefield query expression. In other words, you're not setting the expression to the database. And the reason for that is because we just weren't doing any evaluation of the values there, whereas now we do. So if I view the table contents here, we're actually seeing these two calculated fields, total price and tax. The interesting thing about tax is that it's actually calling a function in a DLL, this get tax function, in a user-defined DLL, and yet it still works. If I click on preview, I can now see the results of my calculations right within Studio. I'm going to unmute everybody here. Any questions so far?
No, all seems good.
Are you going to put in an expression builder for the connection string?
That's a good question. Let's go back up to here. Yeah, I think we I'll add that to our list of. We had removed that, but I think maybe we'll re-add that again. So expression builder.
I mean, even though I know how to do it most of the time, it's still a quick way to do it.
Yeah. No, that's
because It's not a Foxborough connection string anymore. It's more of a .NET or an OLE DB connection string, isn't it?
Or ODBC. We still use, we can either use ODBC or we can use the ADO.NET. So in fact, in this case, this is actually an ODBC connection string, same as you would have used before. So that's, but you're right, that's probably a good suggestion. So I made a note of that. Any other questions? No? Okay. Then I'm just going to go and mute everybody here. All right, so some other new things. Under the File menu, we've got Create Resource File. Our Stonefield query has always been localizable. All of the messages displayed in the user interface are stored in a resource file, and we actually provided a resource editor in the older version that you could go and do the translation if you wanted to. The new version does localization a little bit differently. The localization strings are all stored in an XML configuration file now. Very straightforward file, basically key and value. One thing we didn't support in our older version, though, was localization of field and table captions. For example, although you could show, say, for the German word for file and edit and new report and things like that, we didn't have a way for you to show the German version of category name or categories, the categories table, things like that. You could do it by putting in expressions in here, but we just didn't provide a good way to localize that, whereas the new version we do. Any string like caption and so on is now easily localizable through a resource file. Now, the only complication is that you'd have to create a resource file that has every table and field caption in it, and that would be a lot of work. So under the File menu is a Create Resource File function. What this does is it goes through your data dictionary, it creates a resource file, goes through the data dictionary, and for every field, caption, heading, table name, and so on, it adds a resource to that file. So that way, all you have to do then is go and translate it, and that way now you've got English and German versions, for example. Similarly, this create custom resource file, what this function does is it creates another resource file, but it's pretty much just an empty one. And so you might use that if you want to override some of the things that, some of our messages. For example, you don't want to say a German version, you do want an English version, but you don't like the term data group, for example. Maybe you want to call it module instead. So rather than going and changing our resource file, which of course the problem with that is it would get overwritten the next time we come out with a new release, so you can create a custom resource file, and maybe the only thing you put in there is the key value for data group and the value to display to the user as module instead. So you can override any of the expressions that are shown in the report designer just by creating a custom resource file and putting the values in there. Create help files works the same as it did before, except now the help is all HTML rather than being a CHM help file. So there's nothing else to build like you'd have to do in the other version. And I'll show you an example of that when we actually run the report designer. Upload project, what this function does is this is basically one way that you can upload it to a web server. You specify the server name, the path, the username and password, and it basically just does an FTP upload of all of the Stonefield query application files, all the DLLs and configuration files, plus your Stonefield query project files, the data dictionary and configuration settings and so on. There's also another function here. You won't see it in your version. We've got it. I've got it shown in mine, but you won't see it in yours just until we get finished. And that is convert reports. We'll talk about project conversion in a minute, but this would allow you to convert any reports from the old version to the new version. That way you wouldn't have to recreate those reports from scratch. Nothing new under the Objects menu or on the Edit menu, and the only thing that's new under the Objects menu is Create Join Tree and Create Custom Setting, because those are new things that are in there. I'm just going to unmute everybody here. Any questions about anything so far? No?
I'm glad to see you're going to put the report converter in. That will make it much easier.
Yeah, that was one of my questions.
Sell to existing clients.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. That's something that we had started to work on. We just hadn't gotten too far on it. And after the last webinar, we had a number of people ask about that, so we kind of made it more of a priority. So I've been working on that actually for the last week or so. So it's coming along pretty good. All right. So I'm sorry. What was that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to ask when you said we were going to talk about project conversion. would you be able to open an existing project in this new version and see what happened?
Yes, exactly. So what happens when you open an existing project? Let's go and do that right now. So I'm going to go and pick an existing project. So let me just find it on my machine here. And I'll show you exactly what happens when you do that. This dialog comes up. So it tells you that it's going to convert the project. You have to specify a different folder. We're not going to touch any of the old project files, so you can continue to work with the old version. You specify a new folder where you want those project files to go. The data dictionary format is entirely different. The configuration settings are all entirely different, and so that's why we're going to put it in a whole brand new place. So you specify what project folder you want to put into. You have one other choice as well. In our old version, the data dictionary was a set of FoxPro tables that had to be in FoxPro. Now it's actually a SQLite database by default, but if you want to have it hosted in, say, SQL Server or something else instead, you can do that by choosing other database, choosing the provider to use, whether it's ODBC or SQL Client for SQL Server and so on, and your connection string, and whether you want that encrypted or not, which normally you probably do. And what will happen then is that the data dictionary will actually be stored in whatever database you want it to be stored into. And so that's something that's a new feature. When you click on Convert, it'll actually go through your entire project, all the data dictionary settings, configuration settings, and so on, and it will convert them to the new format automatically. Any questions about that?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, that works quite well. I've done that a number of times.
Yeah, it works pretty well. What will happen actually is it'll create a log. Let me just show you that. For things that it couldn't convert, oops, let me just go and find it on my machine here. For things that it couldn't convert, it actually creates a log file, and it shows you what those things are. Like, for example, this field here had Stonefield query output expression, and because the syntax between the old version and the new version might be different, it's just telling you that you should probably take a look at this field and make sure that the syntax is correct for the new, system.
So it does actually put the field, it does actually transfer the field, if you like. It's just saying go and have a look at it. You haven't actually got to go and re-add it.
Exactly.
Create it again.
Yep.
Yeah.
It did the conversion. It's just telling you that, for example, you should look at new notes and make sure that the expression is still valid, because it might not be anymore.
Okay.
Any other questions?
On the report converter,
Yes.
will you be supporting customized reports?
Yes, that's that part. Pretty much everything but that has been done. That's going to be a pretty big job, just because we have to transfer the layout from the old version to the new. And there will probably be some things that we can't convert exactly, just because of sort of a mismatch between the feature set of the old version and the new version. But what will happen is we'll log those things, and we'll tell you, okay, this report we couldn't deal with this object, or the variables, for example, are one problematic area. A variable, for example, the new version doesn't support variables, so if you had variables in the old version, those wouldn't get converted.
Mainly they like to play with the layout. So the layout.
Right, exactly. Or field expressions. A field expression might have to be visited, to make sure that it's still a valid expression in the new version, for example. So we'll log those things where we think there are problems, but we will do the conversion. Any other questions? No? Okay.
I just think the main thing there is that kind of everything goes over, if you like, even if it's kind of going and have a look at it, rather than bits disappearing and you not realizing that
Right.
little bits have disappeared.
Exactly. Yep. All right. So I'm just going to mute everybody again here. All right, so that's kind of been our whirlwind tour of Stonefield Query Studio, talking about some of the new features here. We're now going to go and take a look at the report designer, because that's kind of the part that everybody really wants to see. The way that you launch the report designer from within Studio is the same way you did before. You just simply click on this button, or from the file menu, choose Launch Stonefield Query. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, the first thing you'll notice, let me just move this out of the way for a second, is that, oops, hang on a second, something funny happened. Let me just open up my project again. Okay, and let's try and launch that again. Here we go. Okay, the first thing you'll notice is this little window comes up here. Stonefield Query uses IIS Express. If you don't have IIS Express installed in your machine, the installer actually automatically installs it for you. IIS Express is kind of like a small personal version of Microsoft IIS. It doesn't support outside connections, for example. It only runs when you tell it to run, so it's not always running. And it shows up in this little DOS window, for example. And so we use that just because we don't assume that you have a development machine that has the full IIS installed on it. That way it's just a lot cleaner and a little bit smaller and so on. So we launch IIS automatically and then open up the browser for that project. And so this is Stonefield Query Web. This is the login page. Now, one thing that you might see, depending on how you've got Stonefield Query configured, is there might be a link over here that says, click here to register. That's normally turned off by default, but we'll describe in the documentation how you can turn it on. That's really only used, I think, for demo versions. The idea being that normally somebody would have to go into the security setup and add a user for them to be able to log into Stonefield Query. But if you've got a demo set up on your website, you don't want to have somebody necessarily contact you and say, hey, I'd like to have access to your demo. They just want to be able to run it on your website. So in that case, if you configure Stonefield Query, just one configuration setting, they will have a click here to register. When they click there, that'll bring up a dialog, ask them for an email address. It will then email that person a password and automatically add them to the security in Stonefield Query. So now they can log in just because they asked for it. Now, like I said, you wouldn't want that in a production environment, but for a demo version, it's really useful. That way you can just put the Stonefield Query Web demo on your website, your customized version of Stonefield Query on your website, and anybody can go in there and start playing with it without having to install anything. So let's go ahead and log in here. And the defaults are admin, just like they were in the old version as well. And so it's loading everything up, and here is take a little bit of a while here, but anyway, here is the new user interface. Actually, I'm going to unmute everybody. I think the noise was a little bit better, so yeah, not too noisy anymore. Anyway, so first thing you'll notice is that we have things that kind of look like folders in our old version. Let me just collapse some of these things here. So these things kind of look like folders in our old version, but these are not folders. These are actually tags. In fact, that's why this little icon here looks like a little tag. The idea of folders doesn't kind of make sense anymore, at least like physical folders. Doesn't really make sense in a web environment. And tags are a little bit more flexible anyway. And pretty much anybody who's ever used iTunes or things like that are familiar with the concept of tags anyway. With a tag, you can actually have more than one tag associated with a report, and so that report might show up multiple times. It might show up under all reports, it might show up under charts, and so on. And I've used words like charts, crosstab reports. In a real application, you'd probably use things like management reports, Doug's reports, weekly reports, whatever mechanism you want to use. It shows beside the tag name the number of reports that use that tag. So in this case, all reports, by the way, is all reports without you having to specify it. It just automatically puts them all in there. So I obviously have a total of 23 reports broken down in these various ways here. One other kind of cool thing about tags is that they can actually be dynamic. So that means that, for example, this new modified report, I don't have any reports that belong to this tag now, but if I create a new report, I won't even have to choose this as a tag. It'll automatically be used for any new or modified report because it's what's called a dynamic tag, and I'll show you how those work a little bit later on. Let's just expand this. So here's a list of the reports that belong to this tag. The little icon beside it indicates the type of report. So this is a label, this is a quick report, this is a crosstab report, and this is a chart, and so on. When you hover your mouse over the report name, an information pop-up appears showing you what tags it belongs to. In this case, it belongs to the tag called labels, when it was created and by whom, when it was last modified, and comments about that report as well. To run the report, all I have to do is click on the highlight for that report name, and it runs it. And we'll talk about the preview window in just a moment or so. Over at the left are controls for this report. So I can edit the report. I can preview it either by, again, clicking here or clicking on the preview button. I can delete the report. I can change the export options, and we'll talk about that in a bit, or I can copy the report and create basically a clone of this report. So let's go and preview it again and just point out a couple of things about the preview window here. There's a toolbar at the top with buttons to either print the entire report or just the current page. Go to the first page, previous page, jump to a particular page number, go to the next page or last page. I can export the report to whatever file type is chosen here in this drop-down list. This button does the same thing except it opens it up in a new window instead. And this button here emails the report, outputs the report to whatever type you've chosen here, and then emails it. The report types are pretty much the same as we had before. Not quite as many, actually, but most of the types we were using that we provided weren't actually being used. So we have PDF, we have Excel, both the 2003 and earlier and 2007 and later types. RTF. Instead of Word, you can use RTF instead. MHT, which is a web page essentially, like HTML, except it also includes images and other kinds of media. Flat text file, a comma delimited file, and then 5 different image type files. And of course, you can scroll and so on. This report is actually showing something interesting here, and we'll talk about this in a minute. This zip code format. Any questions so far?
Nope, good.
All right, let's go and create a new report because that's kind of the most important thing for most users anyway. So let's go and create a quick report. I can choose what data group I want. So in this case, I'll just use order entry, and I'll give it a name, my first report. I'll give it some kind of comments. You can expand the comments area, so if you need more room, you can expand that. And here's where you specify tags. When you click on this, it shows a drop-down list of the tags that have already been defined. You define them under the Tools Tag Editor menu item. And again, I've chosen things like, cross-tab reports, sort of like the report type. In a real environment, you'd have management reports and so on. So we'll say quick reports, for example. And you can pick more than one, so it'll actually appear in more than one place in that case. The next step is similar to step 2 in our current report wizard, data selection. So let's go ahead and pick, for example, this button here is how you add a field. This shows values for that field, just like our current version does. So let's go and add the company name, and let's go to orders and add the order ID, order date, and freight. Now, you notice, by the way, that when we add a field, it doesn't remove it from the available list like the old version does. That means we can actually add the same field more than once to a report, which we couldn't do before. Why would you want to do that? Well, one reason might be you might want to format one instance of the field different than another. For example, maybe you want to have the report grouped by month, and then within the group show the actual order date. So I would have order date on the report twice, one of them displaying only the month, the other one displaying the actual date, and I would group on the one that shows the month. At any point, as we want to see the report, we simply hit preview, and here's the results, just kind of like it was in the old version, right? If we bring up the field properties dialog, one difference here is that in the old version you had to pick a field, then bring up the properties dialog. Here the properties dialog works for all fields. You just pick the field from the list here. And this is actually kind of nice because if you want to change something about multiple fields at the same time, you just pick the fields that you want and then, for example, change the font or the alignment for all of them at the same time. So we have similar options here. We have a column heading, whether the report gets displayed in the report or not, whether it auto-fits, whether you suppress values. These are all similar features that we had in our old version. Under the format, we have the alignment. We have the, whether you want to use the default format or not, and if so, what format, if not, what format to use. For example, for my freight, it's normally set to currency, but if for some reason I don't want to see the currency symbol, I could choose 1,000 separator, 2 decimal places, for example. Or I could type it in here instead. Summary type, you notice that freight was automatically summed because I had turned that on in the data dictionary, but I can choose a different summary type if I want to. Show percentage of total. So these are all similar to what we had before. One thing that's new, though, is control type. The default is label, meaning it'll show you, just the text, basically. But you can also choose barcode, which will show a barcode. We can show zip code, which is what we saw on the labels. It's kind of a weird-looking zip code-like computer-like box of stuff. Checkboxes used for Boolean fields. This will show either an unchecked or checked box, depending on whether it's true or false. Image would display an image, and rich text will display rich text. And it'll actually automatically pick the appropriate type. If in the data dictionary you'd said that this field contains RTF or HTML, it'll automatically pick the rich text control, for example. On the style page, we have font, foreground color, and background color. We also have conditional formats, just like we had in our old version. So you can say that if the number is negative, it should be in red. If it's positive, it should be in black, things like that. And on the link page, you can create links to other reports, or to a URL, or to an email. So again, similar to our old version. And I'll show you this in a little bit more detail later on, because we do have some new features here as well. On the field layout page, this is one thing that's new. On the field layout page, this is one reason why some people use the Advanced Report Designer is to rearrange fields. You can actually do that right here. If I wanted to have the order date come below the order ID, I could do that here without having to go into the Advanced Report Designer. And by the way, speaking of Advanced Report Designer, we don't have an Advanced Report Designer for our web version. We will for our desktop version. And we're actually going to provide a separate Advanced Report Designer tool for people who want to be able to create it. It's just that the web Dev Express doesn't provide an ASP.NET version of the Advanced Report Designer. They do have a Silverlight version, but we're kind of not sure what we're going to do about that, because Silverlight is kind of on the way out. And it's better, instead of spending a bunch of resources to create a Silverlight Advanced Report Designer, only to have Microsoft pull out the rug from underneath us, I kind of think we're going to have the either wait until DevExpress creates an ASP.NET version of the Advanced Report Designer, or just not have one in the web version, have it as a separate tool.
Yeah, I'm quite surprised they haven't done the ASP.NET.
I am too, actually. I am too. I mean, since they have a Silverlight version, why not do a ASP.NET version? But anyway, we'll see what happens there. The next step is grouping. One of the things that we did was we pulled grouping out of the field properties dialog, and we combined it with sorting onto one separate page, because we kind of thought that seemed a little bit more logical. The way that you group a field is just by dragging and dropping it to the group field area. So I'm just going to take group company name and drop it in here. Oh, by the way, one thing, let's go back a step, I didn't show you, was if you want to rearrange fields, you just drag them up and down the list here, just similar to what you did before. Anyway, so I've now grouped on this field, and if I click on the company name, you can see we've got some options here, same as what we had before. Include account in the group footer, create a bookmark on this field, stack fields in the group header. Again, same kind of things that we had before. One thing that is new is grouping. There is one new option here. Continue on the same page, start on a new page, start on a new page, and reset the page number. Those are all features we had before. One thing that's new, though, is start on a new page if it won't fit on the current page. What this means is that if you have a small group and you don't want to have, say, just the group header on the bottom of one page and the items to go with that group on the top of the next page, sort of like window control in Microsoft Word, you can start on the new. You could choose this last option here, and that will move the entire group to the next page if it won't fit that group on the current page. The way that you sort a field is by dragging and dropping it to the sorted fields area. So if I take order date and drag it and drop it here, now it'll be within the company name group, it'll be sorted on order date. And of course I can choose ascending and descending order on those. If I preview the report again, now it's got my report grouped by company name with subtotals, of course, for each of these. And within the group, it's sorted chronologically by date. Now, one new feature that was very commonly requested, but we didn't do in our old version, is group sorting. If I, for example, take freight and I drag it and drop it onto the group sort field here, this tells Stonefield Query that rather than having my groups, the report is still grouped by company name, but rather than having the groups come out in alphabetical order, I want the groups to be organized by the total of the freight for each group. Or I could have it average or highest or lowest or whatever, but we've got it set by default to sum. So now when I preview it, for example, we'll see that this group comes out first because they have the smallest total freight. This group comes out second because they have the next smallest. And if they go to the last page of the report, this group comes out last because they have the biggest total freight. So this is a nice new feature that was kind of requested every now and then, and we've got it implemented now in the new version. One other thing, by the way, if you want, say, the order ID to appear in the group header, you just turn this option on here, and then you specify which group it should appear in. Again, we had that feature in our old version as well. The next step is filtering. This works similar to the way it did before, but one thing that we've changed is we've added the concept of filter condition groups. And the reason we added this is because of the confusion of ands and ors with parentheses. A lot of people they don't get that if you have ands and ors mixed up, you have to use parentheses because ands are always evaluated before ors. So the classic example is city equals Berlin, or city equals San Francisco, and order date is between blah and blah. The problem with that, of course, is that because the and is done first, it would do the and between city equals San Francisco and order date is whatever the range is. So it would take those, or the city equals Berlin without respecting the order date, right? Which is not what you expect. So under the old version, you had to use parentheses, and like I said, a lot of people just didn't understand that. That was kind of a common support issue with us. So with the new version, you notice there's no parentheses. It's either an and or an or right here. So the way that we deal with that is with condition groups. You group those things together that should be grouped together, like city equals this or city equals that. So let's show you how you do that. I'm going to add, this would add a filter condition. Let me add a filter condition group first. And to this group, I'm going to add a filter condition. And I'm going to say customer city. And again, we have a drop-down list here, and we have a values button. One cool thing that's here is that, similar to, you've seen in other web applications, we support some sort of type ahead. So if I type BER, it shows me a list of the actual fields or values that can start with BER, so I can just choose Berlin from the list here. And we have ask at runtime, we have comparative value, field or expression like we had before, display in report header like we had before. One thing that's new, though, is custom description. Let's just stick with this one condition for now, for example, and if I were to preview the report now, it would show city equals Berlin as the filter condition in the report header. But let's suppose I want to display it differently. Maybe I want to display it as Berlin customers. Now when I preview it, all this does is it just changes the description of the filter that's shown here in the header. So that way I can do things like, instead of saying customer type equals active, I can display it as active customers. So just kind of a nice feature.
And presumably you can put field names in there, can you, if you're asking asking for the value at runtime, the value that the parameter value, as it were.
Actually, I don't think we thought of that. So I'm going to make a note of that right now.
You can do that at the moment. If you ask at runtime, obviously you don't know that it's going to be, they're going to choose Berlin. They might choose Copenhagen or.
Right.
So,
good point. Okay.
I'm not at the moment. You can actually put, you can reference the parameter in the.
Right, and I don't think we actually thought of that. So I don't think we support it, but that should be easily done. So we'll make sure we take care of that.
Cool.
I could be wrong about that. I'll have to actually check the code and see if we are supporting. We might be. I'm not sure. Anyway, so let's go and add another condition here. We want these things to be OR'd, though. So I'm going to just click on this to make it an OR condition. And let's go and add another filter condition. So, and again, we'll choose city equals, and we'll choose in this case San Francisco. And again, if I preview it, now I'm getting city equals Berlin or city equals San Francisco. What I want to do now is I want to add a date range in there as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and add another condition group. Because these two, let me just collapse. If you just click on this, this collapses these things. So this is my first condition group. I'm going to go and add another condition group. And this one is, I'm going to add a filter condition to it. And this one, oops, sorry, I collapsed that. Yeah, this looks like a bug. I actually ran into this before here. Clicking on this is actually collapsing the wrong thing. So let's go and delete this and just add this again. Let's go and add that condition group again and add, condition. Oh, I'm doing something here. Like I said, I did discover a bug with this, the way we were dealing with it. Let's go and delete that. And let's go and try it one more time here. Let's add a filter group, add a condition. No, something's acting up here, so I'll have to Anyway, so the idea would be I would add another condition group, and that condition group would contain one condition, which was order date is between January 1st and December 31st, something like that. Like I said, there's just something, there's a little bit of a bug in how that's being dealt with now. The next step is layout, similar to step 5 in our old version. So you can choose your orientation, you can choose your template. One thing that's new is the ability to choose your paper type for the template. So rather than just in the old version, you had to choose, for example, if you wanted legal size paper, you had to choose a template that used legal size. Now you could choose your template and then override whatever the paper size is for that template and choose legal or A4 or whatever. You can also change the margins. In the old version, we allowed you to specify a left margin only. The new version, you can actually specify all 4 margins. These 2 items here, respect page width and auto fit to page, I'll show you those in a minute. We'll go and create a different report, and I'll show you where those 2 come into play. Group location total. This is similar to something we had in our old version. Do you want the totals, subtotals, to go in the group header or the group footer? The default is in the group footer, which means after values. You can also choose before values to show it in the group header instead. Run report with no records we had before, summary report we had before. Distinct records and top end, these we had before, it's just that they were in an advanced properties dialog, and so now because they're commonly used, we've actually got them exposed right here rather than having to click another button to bring them up. We do have an advanced report properties dialog, so if we click that, that's where you can specify things such as what exclusion table to use if you're using an exclusion filter condition. Joins, you can customize the joins. Again, similar to the customized joins dialog that we have now. On the SQL page, you can customize the SQL select statement that's being used. Again, similar to what we have now. And we also have scripts. We only have a couple of them now instead of all the ones we had before. We have after data and after run because those are pretty much the only ones that were being used. So you can put in some .NET code here that would execute after the report was run or the data is retrieved. The last step is security, similar to what we had before. By default, everyone has access to the report. That's why roles for report empty here means everyone. But I could, for example, drag and drop managers here, which means that only managers have access to the report, and then indicate what access they have. Read-only means that they can't delete the report; they can only run it. Full access means they can do, they can delete it or modify it or whatever they want to do with that report. Any questions about our first quick report?
No. I am going to have to leave fairly shortly, though. Are we? How much longer do you think we're going for?
Probably about another 10 minutes or so.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So let's go through a couple of other options here. I'm just going to go back and create another new report. I'm not going to bother giving it a name or tags or anything. Let's go and grab from the customers table. Let's go and grab, say, the company name and comments. And I'm going to mute everybody again here because I got some noise going on. If we go to field properties for comments, let's go in here. Field properties, display, format. For comments, you can see that it automatically chose rich text because that's how I defined that in the data dictionary. If I preview this report, you can see that we now support rich text or HTML code. So this field, for example, here I've got some red and some italics and bold, and here I've got a yellow background and so on. This one uses a different font. So if your application needs that, we actually do now support that kind of thing. Let's go and take that back out again. And let's go and add in, actually let's take this one out as well. And let's go to our employees table. Oh, sorry, I got to choose. Here, let's choose all, and let's go to our employees table, and we'll grab, say, the first name and their photo. And again, if I go to field properties, photo, we can see that this automatically shows an image, and if I preview it, now it shows images. So again, that's something that's you could do that in the old version. It's just that it was harder to do. If I go to my products table and we grab, say, the product ID and product name, and for field properties on the format page for product ID, we'll choose a barcode, and then we can choose properties of the barcode, what type of barcode to use. We've got all different kinds of barcodes in here, whether the text should be shown as well, and what the size of the barcode should be. And when we preview the report, now you can see that we've got barcodes showing here as well. So we do support barcodes. That might work better in a label than this kind of a report. But so like I said, we do support those other different types. Let's just cancel this. Couple more things to show you. We'll go and do a crosstab report. And again, I won't bother giving it a name. We'll just pick some fields here. We'll go and grab, say, the country. And we'll go and grab the product category and the total price. And just like in step 3 of the current version, you specify what field goes where by dragging and drop it. So we'll put this in the rows, we'll put this in the columns, we'll put this in the data area, and when I preview, I get a crosstab report, similar to what we had before. Some things that are different, though, is that using templates, you now have control over a lot more things than you had before. You can control the color and font and styles of cells and column headings and row headings and totals and all kinds of things that you didn't really have control of over before. You also can, we support multiple row fields, we support multiple data fields. The new version also supports multiple column fields, which we did not have before. When you choose a data field, you have the same kind of controls we had before, what type, whether it's a sum or not, whether it's display percentage of total, whether you want to see a percentage change, a dollar change. One thing that's new, though, is the ability to sort on the data. This was a common request that we just couldn't do in our old version. If I, for example, sort in descending order, when I preview the report, now the report is not sorted alphabetically by the first row field. It's now sorted in reverse order by this field. So I'm seeing my best customers at the top of the report, my next best, and so on. Again, that's a new feature that was commonly requested. We couldn't do it because of the way that crosstabs were implemented in our old version. And the rest of the steps are the same, filtering and report options, although there are a few things that are new here. For example, the ability to control whether where row and column totals go, whether you have individual column totals and grand totals, and so on. So a few more options there. Any questions about creating reports? Just a couple more things to show you, and then we'll wind up.
The only question I think I might have is about the currency symbol. Is that something that's set somewhere, or is it from the database? It's actually set. If we go to Tools, Options, which I was going to show you anyway, okay. Similar kind of options here, but this is where you control it right here is with the locale. Okay. And so this has all of the built-in Windows locales. So you can choose, for example, English United Kingdom, and then it would use the pound symbol, or Germany would show the euro, and so on. Yes, that's one of my problems. We actually deal in dollars, euros, and sterling. So. Okay.
Then we'll have to think about how we can deal. I don't think that should be too difficult to deal with. We'll just have to figure out a way to do that. Other options here are similar to what we had before: display real and table and field names, having the report preview open its own window, and so on. Email settings and scheduler settings, which is new, the ability to specify the domain information for a schedule, so that way you don't have to enter it every time you create a schedule. Speaking of schedules, we do have the ability to create a schedule report. One thing that's new in here is when you choose schedule, and you pick when the schedule, give it a schedule name, when it occurs, whether it's daily, weekly, or monthly, and so on. But one thing that's new is you can specify multiple reports. So rather than just scheduling a single report, I can say, well, I want this one, and I want this one, and I want this one, all to be scheduled on this schedule. And then for each one of them, I can specify what the settings are. I'm going to email this one to Bob, and this one goes to Mary and Joan as a PDF, and this one gets sent as an Excel to these 4 people, and so on. A couple of other things. I'm sorry, was there a question?
Can you combine the PDFs together into one document?
We don't have a way right now of combining into a single PDF. That's on our list of things to look at, but that's not currently supported. Under the Tools menu is Tag Editor. This is where you actually go and set up tags. So I could add a new tag, for example, and call it Doug's Reports or Management Reports. I did want to show you how dynamic tags, though, work. Let's edit this tag here. And you'll notice that this one actually has an expression. A couple things about this. First of all, you can have a parent tag. So under Management Reports, I could have Doug's Reports. You do that by specifying simply what the parent tag should be. But you can also specify an expression. So this would be some expression that, if true, means that this report belongs to that tag. So in this case, the now function gives you today's date. The date diff function gives you the difference between today's date and the created at date or the modified date. And being less than 5 means that if this report was created or modified within the last 5 days, then the report automatically falls into the new/modified report tag. So those dynamic tags are kind of cool. You could create a tag, for example, where created by equals Doug, meaning and call the tag Doug's Reports. So it'll automatically, any report that I create automatically uses that tag. Under the security option here is where you define new users and roles. Again, similar to what we had before. You define your roles and what rights they have, and you define users who can get into the application and so on. So again, similar features there. Under the Help menu is...
Sorry, can I just ask a quick question on users and roles? Obviously, there are licenses that we have at the moment for users that can create reports as opposed to just running read-only.
Right.
Is that something else that would be automatically
That's actually done. That's actually done right here. So you can choose what license a user gets, whether they get a report viewer or a report designer license from this drop-down list here.
But obviously, I have keys, if you like, or a set of keys that give me the number of designer licenses that I have.
Right. So with the new version,
I can't redo those unless I actually ask them to be reset first, and then I can reassign them.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah,
Sorry, I'm not explaining myself very well.
No, I understand what you're saying now. That mechanism actually works the same as it does in the current version. It's just it's much less of an issue now because the initial license that we provide for purchasers of the new version is essentially an unlimited report designer and unlimited report viewer. So it's not really an issue much anymore.
Okay.
And the last thing I was going to show you is Help. So under the Help menu is Help Topics. And now you'll see a lot of these, update this topic or do this topic because the help isn't done yet. But this is actually customizable help like the other one was. So in Studio, you choose Generate Help Files, and it replaces our logo with yours and our name with yours and the application just like the old version did, except now it's HTML help rather than a CHM file. But other than that, it's still there. All right, so that was kind of our quick whirlwind tour through Studio and Stonefield Query Web. Any questions before we wind up?
With the scheduler, a normal user can put a schedule request in, can they?
Yes, although you can actually control that. I could specify, for example, that everyone cannot create scheduled reports. You have to be a manager to be able to create a scheduled report. So you actually have control over the schedule and the tag editor at the role level.
Right. And is it the SQL? Is it the web server that creates the report on the scheduled time, or is it the other?
No, it's the web. It's actually done on the web server itself.
Right. So in production. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm just going. Sorry. No, I'll be quiet.
So if this was in production and on a proper IIS server, is there a service running all the time that's servicing those schedule requests?
Actually, it uses the Windows Task Scheduler, same as we did before.
Exactly the same XML background and stuff.
Yep, exactly. Although one thing that we do have that's new is we have the ability to edit and delete schedules right within here because obviously the web user isn't going to have access to the Windows Task Scheduler. So the scheduler function, I don't have any schedules created, so that's why it shows no schedules. But if I did, it would list them here, and I would have the ability to edit them or delete them right from within here.
But only the schedules that person's created?
No, all schedules. Oh, actually, that's a good question. I'll have to make a note about that. I don't know the answer to that. So only user schedules, question mark.
That's admin, of course.
Okay, I'll check into that and find out. Any other questions?
So is the web
I
view...
don't want to...
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, who started? Somebody else started first?
I was just going to talk about deployment, but that's sort of a separate subject anyway. But,
Yeah, that was the deployment is actually right. So deployment onto a web server is actually done in the studio using that upload project function. Once you've done that, you'll go into IIS, create a virtual directory, then you'll use the upload project function to upload the files to that virtual directory, and then do whatever other IIS configuration you need to do, and that's essentially how you deploy it. I think somebody else had a question. Their voice was kind of muted a little bit.
Yeah, I had two questions, Doug.
Okay.
One is, what is the roadmap for the existing application? And the other is, what technologies do you recommend becoming familiar with, given the of the application?
Okay, so the roadmap for the current version is that it will continue to be enhanced and maintained for as long as necessary. In fact, we have a major new release, version 4.4, coming out this year, probably June or so, with lots of new features planned. So we're going to continue to work on and provide new versions of the current version for several years at least. One main reason for that is because we don't have a desktop version of the new version yet. We only have the web version. The desktop version will come later, probably about a year down the road. Once we've got that, then we may revisit the need for having our older version, because now, obviously, with both desktop and web, with the new version and lots of new features, we may not need that old version. But so it's got several years, at least several years left in its life for sure. The second question was technologies. From your perspective, the things that you'll probably want to learn, if you don't already know, would be a .NET language like C# or Visual Basic, strictly for scripting. If you need to create plugins, like if you created scripts in the old version of Stonefield Query, those are replaced with plugins which are written in a .NET language. And so if you're not already familiar with the .NET language, you might either want to make sure that one of your developers is or you are, so that you can go ahead and replace those scripts with the .NET equivalent of those. It also wouldn't hurt to become familiar with web applications in general. The technologies that we're using are ASP.NET MVC application. We're using Bootstrap for styling and some of the controls. We're using Knockout for data binding. But again, that kind of stuff, it's probably really not that important. I mean, unless you actually want to go into the source code, which we will provide the source code for the web version if you need to make some changes to it. Styling obviously would be an issue. So if you don't know CSS, for example, you might want to learn that. And that way you can modify our style sheets and make the user interface look quite different if you want to. Beyond that, you're probably not likely to go and modify our code, so you probably really don't have to know some of those other technologies that well if you don't already.
Did you
You're
mention
using
DevExpress?
MVC, are you, instead of ASP.NET?
We're using ASP.NET MVC. It's sort of like a combination of the two.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. Sorry, there was another question?
Yeah, I thought you mentioned DevExpress, or did you not?
Yes, we use DevExpress Extra Reports as the behind-the-scenes reporting engine. So we don't have the Advanced Report Designer or the template editors done yet. That's something we're working on right now. But both of those will use the DevExpress reporting interface. And so once those are out, you might want to spend some time playing with that to do the advanced report layout kind of things.
Right. Okay.
So do you see this secure enough to be web-facing for clients to use?
Yes, we spent a lot of time thinking about security, talking about working on security. For one thing, you'll notice that it uses HTTPS automatically, right? So that means you're going to have a certificate on your web server, by the way, an SSL certificate. So that's one thing that we're doing for security. We've got, we're using, well, like I said, we've done a lot of thinking about security. It's pretty well locked down, I think. You may, start playing with it and playing with that a little bit and see what you think about it. But we spent a long time thinking about it and designing the security to make sure that it was going to be an issue. Not an issue, I should say.
Most of our data is coming off SQL servers. Now, is there a way of tying in a user logging on to your web interface to either the domain user, would therefore get the SQL rights assigned to that domain user?
There's a number of ways you could do that. One is your connection string information could be, for example, that all users when they log in use the same connection string, and that connection string is, say, a read-only user, for example. Another option is that because although the user interface here, there's a security where you can manually add users and roles, but everything you see here has an API. So if you want to populate the users collection programmatically and have each user use a different connection string, and that connection string, they log into SQL Server using their same login name, you can certainly do that because again, everything's got an API here with control over those kinds of things.
Right. And if you want to deploy multiple versions of a project, say, so it's Skin for one of our own customers, you just deploy it to a separate subdirectory than the IS.
Yes, you'd have a separate virtual directory with a just different style sheet. Although I think one of the things I'm going to ask the guys who worked on the web part of that is maybe a user, if there's a way to handle a user-specific CSS. And I don't see why we couldn't. We don't have a control for it now, but I don't see why we couldn't have. If you wanted to have different skins for different users, it's just a different CSS file that gets used, and we could certainly swap that out for different users if we needed to.
Different graphics, that sort of stuff.
Right.
And things.
Right.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm going to have to go.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming, Catherine.
Thank you very much. I'll have a look. Can we email you with any questions, or what's the protocol on that?
Our preferred mechanism for questions is actually via support ticket on our support system.
And is there
for the product
area for the test version? Is there?
Yes. For the product, you actually choose Stonefield Career Enterprise as the product name.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. All right, thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Any other questions?
Is there an upgrade path from the Stonefield Studio to the enterprise version?
Yes. Do you mean in terms of like converting projects or pricing or what?
Well, no, just for the customer, if they have to buy this version, as opposed to a brand new version, is there an upgrade price?
Oh, yes, there is. And if you check with Chris, he can give you all the details on pricing.
Okay. So the pricing's already established.
Yes.
Great.
Doug, I've only just managed to get my test environment working.
Okay.
And I've had to use a DSN as a connection string to a SQL server.
Okay.
Can you not add a SQL connection just as a string without using a DSN? Or?
Yes, you can. In fact, that's what I'm using here. I'm using an ODBC connection string here.
Right. Okay, so you specify the driver.
Yep. And then this is actually an access one because it's a sample project. But I've got another one. I think I have another. Well, anyway, if I didn't, I would just typical connection string here. So I might do things like let's just copy and paste this here.
This goes back to one of your other people on the phone saying a connection string build would be quite useful.
Right. So I can say, SQL Server, semicolon, database equals whatever, server equals whatever, and so on. And again, this is the connection string. This is the connection string that's used for Studio, so it can read the data structures. And if this use default connection is chosen here, then then SQ Web will also use it. But if you want to, for example, you could say user can choose DSN or scripted, meaning that the connection string is actually defined in code.
Right. Okay, so mine fails. It brings up the SQL structure, but it won't allow me to view the data when I use this direct SQL driver.
Okay.
So I'll have a ticket for that.
Yeah, I was going to say create a support ticket. That's probably the best way to do that. Yeah.
It's a good looking application. I think it's for a first app. It's a lot better than a lot more features.
Yeah. Yeah, we've added a ton of new features, things that people have requested for a while that we wanted to make sure that we included in the product. So yeah, we've done a lot there. Any other questions?
I mean, the trick is to get the connection string, because the development machine is going to have a totally different server name. So when you deploy it on the client side, you don't want the users having to know the connection string. So
no, absolutely. Absolutely, and there's several ways around that. And in fact, that's the same issue that we face in our current version as well. And the way that we deal with that is a couple of ways. This use default connection is pretty much only going to be used if you're using this internally. You create an application in-house as opposed to you create applications that get deployed somewhere else. More than likely, it's going to either be user can choose DSN, meaning they'll set up DSNs on their machines and connect to them, or scripted, meaning that you can read the connection settings from, say, a config file, and you'll programmatically set those connection settings at runtime. So these are probably going to be the most likely used ones here.
But if they're running off a website, none of them will ever have access to anything on the web server.
No, and that's why almost certainly scripted is going to be the most commonly used one, I think.
Yeah. I mean, that's the beauty. That's why even encrypting it isn't as necessary anymore, because the user can't see any of the config files on the server.
Right, exactly. There's no access to it at all. Yep.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
No, I'm looking forward to it.
Great, excellent.
The project, the report converter is the one I want to play with.
Yep. Well, that's
what's going to sell it to the clients, to me.
We're going to come up with a new beta build later this week, and the report converter will not be in that one yet, just because it's not quite finished yet. We don't have it's not dealing with the advanced stuff yet, but it'll probably be the one after that.
Yeah, great.
Alrighty, well, thanks everybody for coming. If you do have any other questions, you can create a support ticket on our support system and just make sure that you use Stonefield Career Enterprise as the product name. Thanks a lot for coming. We'll see you all later.
Thank you, Tom.
All right, bye.
Good day.